Welcome to Behind the Counter, episode 1. My name is Travis Severance. I'll be your host today. We're coming to you live from Millennium Games Studios. And today we're going to have a conversation with Paul Butler, who currently owns Games and Stuff in Glen Burnie, Baltimore, Maryland area. Essentially what this show is going to be is we're going to do sort of a who are the people in your neighborhood type style show. And we're going to bring on a bunch of people to talk about in the game industry from all walks of life. So we'll talk to retailers, we'll talk to publishers, we might talk to some game designers. It's going to have a lot of retail focus to it, hence the name Behind the Counter. So we're going to bring in some people that are outside of Millennium Games to talk about what they're doing in and around the industry. So it's going to be interview style. Today I've got my good friend Paul Butler on today. We've known each other for, oh gosh, I don't know, Paul, how long?
Man, that's a great question.
15 years maybe?
15?
14 or 15 years. We happened
14.
We own two different businesses with each other as well, and have done a bunch of different things in the industry. So it's going to be interview style. So I'm going to just start it off with, Paul, can you tell me a little bit about your store?
So Games Stuff is about 25,000 square feet in our current location. It's second only to the gentleman that I'm speaking to right at this moment. We relocated almost a year ago. It was October 13th of last year that we moved here. We've been open since 2000. The original owner sort of took over a card shop that had been sort of a sports card shop that then became a trading card shop, a game trading card shop. Then I took over management of it in the 2009-2010 area. And I just kept adding more board games and adding more role-playing games and adding more stuff. And I have a corporate retail background, so I just had a very different perspective on things. And we've moved a couple times, and we're currently in this giant monstrosity.
What
we carry just about everything.
What made you want to get into the game industry in general on the retail level?
I have been a gamer since I was very small. The story I've told in a couple other forums is I was the ripe old age of 5 the first time I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the late 70s. My older brother taught me how to play. But out of college, I was a retail guy. I ran record stores, I ran clothing stores, I ran all kinds of stuff. So I had some serious life changes back in the 2009 area, and I moved back to Baltimore, and I had a buddy that owned a game store and just needed somebody to help out. And I did that for about a year, and then he had cause to get rid of the old manager. He asked if I would take over, and I told him, while I'm not a person who's necessarily motivated by money, I would like to be able to quit all my other jobs so that I could, if I was going to manage this thing, I wanted to be able to manage it and not have any other concerns. So we came to an agreement. I took over managing it, and we went from there.
And then how long were you managing the store before you ultimately ended up buying the store?
So I technically bought it in 2017, but given the way that I was just a much more outgoing personality than the previous owner. And I been going to a lot of trade shows. I was at the store more frequently than he was, and in many ways I just become the face of the store. So a lot of people didn't even realize that I wasn't the owner for a few years. But I had basically taken over all of the operations except for some of the back end accounting within a few years of taking it over. But then, as I said, I actually bought the thing for real in 2017.
Nice. That's, not dissimilar to my origin story as well. My former owner is also named Ed as well.
Right.
So we have not dissimilar backgrounds, although I didn't come from any kind of corporate retail. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you faced running a store? And what did you do to try to overcome those challenges?
Are we talking currently or in the history of me running the place?
Dealer's choice.
All right, let's go with currently. We have, since I've been in charge, sort of slowly but incrementally increased in scale and sales volume. And since moving to this location, obviously we've increased. Our previous location was 7,700 square feet. To go from 7,700 to 25,000 is, I feel like we leapfrogged a step, right? The things that I do with my time here is probably 80% different from what it was 3 years ago. I'm on the floor a lot less. I do a lot more sort of big picture strategy and kind of like, a lot with the company culture or the branding or what we want to do, how we want to be positioned. I still do a fair amount of the buying, but not all of it. I've delegated out some of that, although as I've frequently said, you'll take board game buying from my cold dead hands. But it's just not being, the biggest challenge for me is not being boots on the ground in the same way.
Sure.
I'm physically at the store less than I used to be, also because I have a 4-year-old.
Sure.
So that's been part of it too. But most of my time is now tied to a computer. outside of large scale events or weekend events. That's probably the biggest challenge for me right now, is not being, on the front lines, as it were.
And how many employees do you currently have?
That's a great question, because that answer 2 weeks ago would have been different. I have at this point delegated all my hiring as well.
Wow.
But I think we got to be close to 26 to 30 at this point. But I've also become that guy where it's like I walk in and I was like, oh, you work here? Hi, I own the place. Who are you? I used to joke that I was that, but no, I'm definitely that now.
The further I got away from the counter, as well as sort of your roles and responsibilities and the business sort of scales up, you see less and less of that customer contact, and you've got employee contact and stuff like that. Have you guys gotten into like doing the org chart and all of that sort of stuff now?
So I did the org chart, and it's due for a refresh, but I did an org chart a couple months before the move, because I brought on a woman who had worked with me a lifetime ago at Hot Topic, and we had sort of kind of maintained some connections over the years, and I sort of joked about how she might want to become my part-time book buyer and taking over book buying from me, because we sort of shared a sensibility about it. And the next time we hung out, she was like, how serious were you about that? And I said, very. She's like, what if I wanted full-time? So suddenly I was like, okay, well, this person has a great resume, can bring a lot of skills that we don't have, but I don't exactly need a store manager. And I know there were certain elements of that she didn't want to do, and I already had a store manager. So at that point, I kind of blew up the existing org chart and built a whole new one based around the fact that I was bringing on this, pretty, high tier employee. Forgive me, I picked up my phone to double check through our software. My phone tells me we have 39 employees.
39?
Yeah, but some of those are contractors that are
okay,
that are in the system.
So people that are coming in and out. So you're talking about using some software that you use to kind of maintain communication with the rest of the team and stuff that you can take a look at on your hand. So you talked about books. Is there what sort of product do you stock at the store currently?
So I mean, I frequently refer to the 4 quadrants, which is to say the basics of game retail, which is board games, role-playing games, miniatures games. And traditionally, that 4th quadrant had been Magic. It was the only quadrant that was a single brand. But now I think it's safe to say that is trading card games. As you and I have talked many times, like, you carry trading card games in a much more aggressive way than I do. I tend to cherry pick the stuff. But I've historically carried miniatures games the same way you carry trading card games. So those are my 4 sort of main pillars. But from there, we brought in doing books well over 10 years at this point. Not comics, but fiction and nonfiction stuff. And then, especially since moving into this location, we had some room to stretch. We brought in plush in a real way. Gifts is sort of our catch-all category for, are your little impulse purchase, fidget toys or squishy balls and all that sort of stuff. That does gangbusters for us. I think there's something to be said, especially as we, and this is a little outside the bounds of your question, but as we moved to this location and we were trying to, appeal to a broader demographic, which is to say people that don't necessarily use the word gamer to describe themselves. What all these supplementary categories do is to give the spouses of gamers or the families of gamers that are sort of along for the ride something that they're interested in, they can also pick up from us.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, so those people aren't necessarily gamers, but they get excited about coming to games and stuff because, they can browse the book section, or, they can buy a Frisbee or whatever.
So I think when you made the move too, didn't you bring in Lego at that time as well?
Yeah, I did. Yep. Lego was definitely moving.
It's a big undertaking.
Yeah. It's a big undertaking, and for not a lot of scratch. But but it's I have no complaints so far.
It sort of speaks to what you were talking about, though, having that thing that's a little bit more mainstream for the gamer adjacent person to be able to come in and wrap their hands around it, and you be able to pick that up while you're picking up your regular nerd stuff that we sell to everybody else, basically.
And it's an interesting equation too to kind of try to figure out where that stuff fits into your identity, right? Like, I remember when I first took over this store, we didn't really carry kids games. Mm-hmm. I wanted to make a whole kids department. It was a little scary at the time because there's a certain kind of gamer that feels like families are invading their gamer space or whatever, right?
Absolutely.
And, so there's something to be said about trying to make sure that products that are outside of your core still feel like a part of who you are and contribute to who you are, and they don't alienate your base.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. How do you decide which games to stock in your store?
You know as well as anybody that this is a question that everybody asks all the time. I have taught entire hour-long seminars on this very thing. Once a week, somebody in some retailer forum says, how do you guys keep up with what games, blah, blah, blah. And, that's the majority of my job, is paying attention to what's going on both in the online spaces, as well as going to trade shows and seeing things. There's something to be said about seeing a game out of the box, seeing a game being played by actual gamers and customers, seeing the consumer response to those games. It long ago stopped being about what I like, although I certainly champion the things that I like. And there's the bit of a special sauce to figure out, okay, how much of this will appeal to my customers? How much of the sales trajectory on this will change if I do take it out of a box and demo it regularly? How much of the hot thing on Board Game Geek is really only appealing to those diehard board game geeks, and they will have probably bought it at a discount online already, pre-ordered 4 months ago? I remember a couple years ago, I had a contractor that was helping me with some social media stuff, and she pointed out, some title from Board and Dice or something similar, right? One of these like heavy Euros.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, that's a big hit. Have you sold a lot?" I was like, "I think we sold 4." And she was like, 4? I'm like, "I don't know, maybe 6." She was like, "But that game's so popular." I was like, "Yeah, but it's so popular amongst a very particular kind of customer, and those customers don't come to me for that game."
Yeah.
So the fact that we sold 6 of that is a pretty solid hit for that style of game.
Yeah, you run into
another thing over here where I can, and I think it was around the time of Kabuto Sumo, right? Meanwhile, this other thing over here where you get to push colorful beetles off of the table at each other, I put on the demo table and I sold 300
with cool wrestling names and stuff like that. Yeah, people that are lifestyle board game customers don't often understand that there's a whole like the exterior of that is where we tend to do our best work, right? Like they are already inclined to understand that. Not to say that we can't bring in Kickstarters and interesting things that they wouldn't normally see or something that they maybe passed up on or weren't paying attention to. Like we can get their money that way, but it gets to be harder when it comes to that sort of stuff that you're talking about.
And it's a real weird balance, right? Because it's like, because those people want to be able to go into a store and feel like it's for them too, right? So there needs to be a certain level of authenticity, and whether that's from your staff who plays those kinds of hard, heavy games or whatever, or whether it's from the stuff that you stock, like it should be on the shelf, even if it means I'm only going to sell 2 instead of 200. There's a certain, as I say, special sauce to making sure that you're still that source for those folks.
So 2 different top. What strategy do you use to engage your local community and build loyalty from your customer base currently?
So funny you should mention that. So just today, I had a lengthy conversation. We are implementing a new loyalty program soon, but that's perhaps a tangential question. I think it comes down to having knowledgeable employees. So again, people feel like, we know what they're talking about, and we are engaged in the current conversation about games, right? Whether that's how to build your best commander deck, or listening to somebody wax on about their 12th level paladin, or the relative merits of worker placement mechanics, right? Like you need a little bit of that just to feel like people feel like it's a space for them. Secondly, we are aggressively welcoming, accepting of so many different kinds of folks, and we really sort of wear that on our sleeves kind of very aggressively. And part of it is purely commercial, which is have the things that people are looking for, right? So much of our growth in the last, I used to say 10 years, but I've been here forever now. But like since I've taken over was because I wish no ill will upon any of my competitors, right? But especially in the early days, I was noticing customers that had traditionally gone to shop X down the street started coming to me instead. And the refrain was always, well, they don't have what I'm looking for. They don't have their finger on the pulse. You know that this is the hot thing and you've got a pile of them. Buying is a huge part of that equation, just having the thing that people want, right? Otherwise, it's just a store full of cardboard that nobody gives a crap about. Right? So I think our mutual friend Steve Ellis just recently said, I can't remember the conversation, but said, store success is 80% buying or something like that. So
100%. Yeah. Steve's on point there. So speaking of that, how important are in-store events like game nights or tournaments to your business right now?
There's kind of two angles there. One is the traditional sense of like, you got your weekly Magic play, or you got your sporadic tournaments or whatever, or you've got weekly play for a new trading card game or new miniatures game that's coming up. Those are important to build community, particularly for new games, because people want to feel like they've got somebody to play against. So like Altered, for instance, we only just started our weekly Altered events, and already people online are chattering like, man, I wish I had people like that playing near me, whatever. And like, they just need to have a place to go to be able to play the games. Ideally, it means you're seeing that customer once or twice a week, because they're there every week to play the game. So they're in your store, they're probably buying stuff, right? And they certainly feel like they're a part of something, right? Now, the other thing that happens, though, it's really come into sharp focus since we've moved in this location. Our sort of special weekend events have been explosive. Like, if we look at our typical weekday, it does X% over the before times before we moved. And then a typical weekend does, maybe 3X what we did before the move. But whenever we do a big marquee event, because we've got so many new eyeballs and so many different types of eyeballs, some of these crazy weekend events go nuts. So we've just been getting a little wacky lately. Like we ran a board game carnival a couple months ago because the local county carnival closed after 100 years. So it just inspired me. I was like, let's do a board game carnival. What does that mean? I don't know. We're gonna have a spinning wheel for discounts and like, who knows? We'll figure it out. I rented a cotton candy machine and a popcorn machine and whatever. We just went crazy. We're doing a harvest festival this weekend, which is like, autumnal themed games and lots of spooky stuff.
So how often are you guys doing that? Is it like sort of a once a month thing? Just whenever it sort of you find something that like you guys can lean into, you've identified an opportunity, that sort of thing. Like
it's a moving target, but we've had meetings about that very thing. Like, I mean, we call them our tentpole events.
Yeah.
And not monthly, but I mean, we're looking at I think 8 to 9 a year.
Yeah.
It also includes sales events, right? So that's also our Black Friday event. That's also, our board game bazaar, which is where we clear out all the backstock of used board games and make an event out of that.
So that sort of stuff that you're talking about with those events that are a little more themed, you're sort of just feeling those out, right? You're just that's what you're in the process of shaping right now.
Well, and seeing what sticks.
Because previously it was like sidewalk sale. That's cool. Sales will always bring somebody in, but I don't feel like other than there being a pre-release or a regional qualifier or something like that, like I don't feel like we used a lot of that sort of theming stuff to, it's a sale and we're focused on some stuff, but we're also doing some gaming and we're also doing some playing and we're also doing a little bit of this.
Yeah, I done it really early in my management of games and stuff, and it was fine, right? Like I used to run a board game luau in February. Like, because I just wanted to inject some summertime energy into the doldrums of February. And
sure.
Play island-themed games all day, and we roasted pineapple in the store, and it was silly. Was it a great sales day? No, but people still remember that. They're like, oh, is that the day you were in the grass skirt? I was like, yes, that was the day I was wearing the grass skirt. like we would just get a little silly, and, the effort wasn't worth the reward. But now here we are 12, 13 years later, and we're doing these things on a different scale, and we're pulling in a different kind of customer for these sorts of things and really just going over the top with it. And it's really making an impact on the bottom line.
Makes a ton of sense. How do you market your store locally and online?
I got to pull back from that question just a little bit. So where we're at, which is near BWI Airport, not far from Baltimore City, we are sort of smack in the middle of some really dense population area, right? The whole Mid-Atlantic is just like people. So most game stores are destination stores because the gamers find them. What we started discovering, especially after our previous move, was that once people walked in the door, they went, oh, holy crap, look at this place. So they might still go to Bob's House of Games down the street or whatever as their regular game store, but they would make special trips to see me because I was the big game store. So whether it was tax season or the holidays or a pre-release or whatever, they would make special trips to see me. Well, now we've cranked that up to 10. Sure. Now we're this monster, and you've never seen a store like this. So now our area of impact is like bigger and bigger. It's like, get out your old school 40K templates, right? Like we're just getting bigger and bigger. We've got our regulars, and then we've got the folks that we see maybe once a month, and then we've got folks that we see just for these special events. Marketing has always been a challenge, but we're at the point where, I have a full-time contractor and who's now an employee who helps with marketing. She's a wizard in ways that I am incapable of doing, right? And it's both, we're working with outside companies to do some third-party stuff with everything from, social media to Google to this, that, and the other thing. We're also doing some email stuff. It's a lot of stuff that frankly is might as well be elvish to me. Like I just don't understand it. There's a certain freedom that comes from knowing that you've got somebody who really understands this stuff. And then once you can kind of meld the two, as far as like game knowledge and customer base versus, how these things work in other kinds of businesses.
So when you look at going down that road, right? Like this is something probably you've got a full-time staff member, you've got some other outside people that you're working with. How do you decide? How do you determine like I want to spend to do this thing? I think there's a value there. How am I going to measure this thing? How am I going to spend? Like what sort of budgetary concerns do you put on yourself about starting sort of a new endeavor like that? Because it feels like it's a lean. And
it's not always data that you can track. Like sometimes it's great, right? Like we can point to the dollars that we spent on Facebook and we can say, oh, here's the ROI on this, or the ROAS or whatever. And we can see exactly how much money this generated versus how much money we spent, right? And we've got some email wizardry that now we can see, oh, somebody opened the email and we can tell that they clicked through and bought a thing. Or even somebody opened the email, we can tell when they were in the store later and bought a thing, which is weird, right? But then, so this Altered event, like you and I were talking, before we started recording about Altered, I ran a big learn to play and sealed event last week for Altered. My marketing company that was running ads for me ended up turning them off because we weren't getting the ROI that they expect. You know, and I've given them the ability to say, oh, this thing's not working, click it off, we're going to shift to something else. But what happened was that our day of on-site registrations were way higher than we expected. That's not necessarily data that we can say for sure it came from those ads, but it couldn't have hurt. Right.
Yeah,
so,
we ran into sort of the same thing. We had we had a Yu-Gi-Oh regional over the weekend, and initially, like, sometimes if we have pre-signups and stuff like that, we decide to put the full team on it. We'll do streaming, we'll do commentary and that sort of thing. They have a whole bunch of events going on this weekend as well, but our pre-reg was garbage. We had 101 walk-ups. Like,
right?
Like, a normal store can't really compare for something like that. Like, if 101 people just decided they were going to show up that day, and good luck with tables and chairs, right? And like, some of it, you know, we're a victim of our own success, and that a lot of these guys have come down, they've seen our store before, they know we can house them, so they're not so worried about doing the pre-reg. But it was the same sort of thing. We promoted it. Konami did their thing. I'm sure there were plenty of people that took a look at it. There's no way that everybody that of those 101 people just woke up that morning and went, you know what? I'm going to drive to Rochester and I'm going to do this thing. Like
so we did our grand opening. You know, our sort of, you know, we opened last year in October, so we kind of kicked the grand opening down to February because that was both, you know, our traditional sort of birthday thing, and also we just didn't want to deal with the grand opening in Q4. You know, I was hoping we'd get a couple hundred people at open. I think there were like 450 people in line in the snow waiting to get into the store.
Yeah, that's great.
And I was like, where, how did these people find out about this? You know, or the board game carnival we did a couple months ago, we ran out of cotton candy and popcorn halfway through the event. And I had doubled down on the quantities a couple weeks earlier. I was like, I think I'm getting the vibe. We're going to need a lot more. No, I was wrong. It was gangbusters.
I mean, those are great successes though. Between this location, or you can even talk about the previous location, what's one change that you made, what the previous owner was doing, or since you've moved into the big space, that you think's had the biggest impact on the success of the store?
I think the biggest change from him to me was merchandising. Having come from a corporate retail background, you can't just put stuff on a shelf and expect it to move. You have to change things frequently and highlight things differently. I know for a lot of stores, you know, window displays are important because of foot traffic, but a lot of our stores are also in places where foot traffic is irrelevant. Right. So window displays become meaningless.
Yep.
Right. So, you know, it's all about, you know, front-facing end caps or changing, because the reality is most of our customers we see very frequently. And the minute they walk in and something's different, they notice. Or the minute they walk in and you've got, you know, a genuine tower of Dark Towers built on the sale floor, they know that, oh, well, this must be important because they have a bajillion of them. Merchandising, and again, coming from that retail background, I think that was the biggest difference from me, you know, taking over the old owner. Since I've moved, I think it's been those large marquee events. It's leaning into folks that aren't necessarily gamers, but they're gamer adjacent, right? The reality is board games are more popular than any of us could ever guess.
Absolutely.
Right? And there are people out there who play board games that would never call themselves a gamer.
Right.
Right. But what we've done is we provided this like interesting piece of entertainment or this interesting event for them to come. I mean, who doesn't want free cotton candy? Or who doesn't want, you know, to come see, you know, a costume contest for a harvest festival or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You know, our mutual buddy Steve was recently talking to a publisher, and they were talking about how much stuff they sell on Amazon. In particular, how much money they saved when they took over their own fulfillment from a third-party company, and these numbers were astronomical. And these are games that we carry, right? Yep. We think, oh, they're solid hits. We continue to carry them, but the number of units that they move on Amazon is unbelievable. And you're like, oh, here's a game that's been out for a very long time, but there's still a real depth of opportunity there. It's the same reason why, like, you and I mean, on some level, every December, I'm still surprised by how many Catans I sell.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right?
It doesn't make any sense.
Zero effort into selling Catan.
Right.
But, like, you know, years ago, I learned I better have cases and cases of Catan because it's just going to move.
Well, and it's not like you're ever going to be like, oh, I got to throw out this Catan.
Right. Or Ticket to Ride, right? Like, there's like the breadth of the of the market that is untapped out there is bigger than any of us could possibly imagine. And I think there's a real mistake in assuming that we have to serve the vocal minority, that is those like super goobers on the forums or online or whatever, or even, and I hesitate to say this, but even sometimes the people that show up to our events. I love my events. I've clearly invested in events. I have a giant space for events, right? But the reality is 90% of my customers that spend real dollars in my store will never set foot in my event space.
Right.
And you can't lose sight of that. That isn't to say you should downplay the events at all, but you need to remember that the events serve a particular part of your customer base, and it's probably a minority.
I think it's an equation that a lot of retail doesn't do too. They don't realize. I think they think that that's it's both things at the same time, and I don't think it is. I think I have segments of customers that are event customers of mine. They'll buy a pack of sleeves here and there. They'll buy some glue, some paint, that sort of thing. Maybe an occasional new release or something like that. But the bulk of what they're spending is spent elsewhere. They just come in and play in events because they want to socialize. They want to be part of the league. They want to get to know some local people and stuff like that. And this is where they're coming.
Main value for them,
Yep.
right? Because they're buying other places, like our main value to them is the space that we provide.
Yep, and I'm okay with that, right? We price our events accordingly. We've got our event space monetized the way that we need to, and I don't have the level of resentment that some of our peers that have people that just come in and sit in the event space and don't really do any purchasing. And it's like a lot of times it's just the recognition that they're sort of two separate customers. Like, yeah, you will get some occasional sales from them, but like you said, the majority of the people that buy the stuff that we sell come in and they bring it home. And then that's it. We never see them in there because they have their own groups or they have their own families or that sort of thing. Speaking of Amazon, big box, that sort of thing, how do you handle competition with online retailers and other big box stores?
I ignore them.
Wow.
I mostly ignore them, right? So here's the trick. Here's, pick a third tier, obscure-ish hobby game.
Yeah.
Right? The minute it's on the shelf at Target, it's in front of eyeballs that never would have seen that game in my store. And there's a certain brand equity that comes from having that thing on the shelf at Target. And then the reality is most of the time at Target and these things, then it goes away, right? But what they're doing is they're sort of raising the profile of these style of games in general. You're not going to get customer service at Target. These days, I got to find somebody in Target to get a pair of socks out of the freaking locked case, right? They're going to sell what they're going to sell. They're creating more gamers. I can't control when they come in my door. I'm going to try all these various methods we talk about marketing to make sure that they get in my door. But once they're in my door, they're mine. Unless they're mostly motivated by price. In which case, sure, they'll be an Amazon customer. Oh, until I've got all the Arc Nova and there's no Arc Nova on Amazon, then they're going to come to me, right? And fine, that's whatever. I mostly don't care about what Big Box does. The only thing that's frustrating is if they have exclusives that last longer than they should. Like they got 60 days or 90 days. I don't know if I care, right? But like if it's an exclusive that really feels like something that's targeted at gamers, then that's dollars that we've lost.
Sort of sucks.
Right?
Yeah.
But like so many of these, like games from like Buffalo or like some of these other sort of these publishers that kind of straddle hobby and mass market, they hit Target first. Fine, whatever. My customers aren't necessarily buying that at Target. And I got, if I demo table it or something, it's just a different equation. I'd lose my mind if I worried about what the Targets and Amazons are doing in the world.
I would agree. So last question. So if we have somebody watching this video, somebody that's taking a look and thinking about opening up a board game store, what single piece of advice would you give somebody that's thinking about opening a board game store today as something that they may either not be thinking about or not considering that you think is vital?
You don't have enough money. Yeah, you are undercapitalized. Yeah, so many people open stores on a shoestring budget. I believe it was you, or maybe you were quoting somebody else when you once said, the game store is the pizza shop of retail.
Yes.
Which is, if you got a pizza oven, you can open a pizza shop, right? If I got a shelf I bought at IKEA and I put some magic boxes on it, I got a game store.
Yep.
If you just want to be a little hole-in-the-wall magic clubhouse, fine, great, more power to you. But if you want to be an actual game store, sure, you can kind of grow incrementally, but so many people do this on a tiny little shoestring budget and then kind of limp along for a few years and then go away. Yeah, I think that's my one piece of takeaway is you are probably undercapitalized.
Budget. Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. So where can people find your store? Where can they find you out in the social universe? Where would they go to look to find your stuff?
We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Take your pick. What am I missing there?
I think you got him.
I guess we're on X, Twitter, whatever.
I don't know what that is.
For those people that still are.
I don't do that. That's Logan.
Yeah,
to do. Ryan. They handle that.
Yep. Yeah,
producers handle that stuff. So you want to stick around for like 20 minutes, do some AMAs with me after this?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, we're going to wrap up for today. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. Behind the Counter episode 1. Thanks, Paul, for coming out and having a chat with me. I wouldn't want to start episode 1 of this new venture with anybody else. We'll stick around for like 20 minutes. We'll do an AMA for anybody that's tuned in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.